I saw in my son's eyes the same hollow stare that my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister. In that moment, I realized that my family's nightmare had returned. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Doña Selena, with 72 years on my shoulders, speaking from my small home in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, right on the border with the United States. This northern breeze is a blessing when the heat sets in, isn't it? Today, I want to share a story I've held in my heart for over 30 years, a tale of love, pain, and how sometimes fate leads us down paths we never imagined. Before we begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor. Please subscribe to my channel and give it a like. It costs nothing. I'd also love for you to tell me in the comments where in Latin America you're watching from. I want to know your names because I enjoy reading each and every comment. It makes me feel less alone in this big house, now filled only with memories and me. I was born in 1953 in a modest yet cozy home in the Chero neighborhood, also here in Nuevo Laredo. My parents, Don Andrew and Doña Hope, were hardworking people. My father was a carpenter, crafting furniture that was truly art, thanks to his curves and carvings, things you hardly see these days. My mother made clothes for others, mostly evening gowns. The house was always full of colorful fabrics, lace, and ribbons she used in her work. I had a happy childhood playing in the street with other kids and walking to school hand in hand with my older sister, Josephine. Although we didn't have luxuries, there was always food on the table and love. Oh, how much love there was in that home. Even after a long day, my father always took the time to tell stories before bed. My mother would hum as she sewed, making the house feel brighter and more alive. The only shadow hanging over our family came from the stories about my paternal great-grandfather, Don Antonio. He passed away long before I was born, but the tales about him were whispered by the elders when they thought the little ones weren't listening. They said he had mental issues, that sometimes he would go entire days without sleeping, talking nonsense and seeing things and people that didn't exist. It was said that once he tried to hang his own sister, convinced she had been replaced by a snake disguised as a human. It was something that ran in the family. My grandmother used to whisper to my mother, "Thank God it skipped a generation. Neither your father nor you inherited it." I grew up hearing those stories, like listening to a scary tale, feeling a chill down my spine, believing it belonged to the past and wouldn't affect me. How wrong I was, my God. But let's take it slow, because this is a long story, and I want to share every detail. I finished my studies at 18 in the early 70s. It was a wonderful time, you know. People dreamed and held on to hope for the future, despite all the country's struggles. I got a job as a secretary in an accounting office downtown. It wasn't a great salary, but it was enough to help at home. Plus, I had a little extra money to treat myself to a lipstick or a new pair of sandals every now and then. It was at that office where I met Philip. Oh my God, just saying his name, even after all these years, still makes my heart skip a beat. He was an accountant, freshly graduated and from Monterey, coming to work in the city, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and most striking of all, those honey-colored eyes, almost golden when the sunlight hit them. An attractive man, right? I'm not just saying that because he was my husband. No, he was the kind of man who turned heads when he walked by. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. He walked into the office carrying a mountain of folders he could barely hold. I was organizing some papers, and when I looked up, I saw that clumsy guy trying to keep everything from falling. I rushed to help him. Our hands touched for a brief moment, and that was enough. It was like a spark, you know, that jolt you feel when you meet someone special. "Thank you so much," he said, wearing a smile I would later learn was uniquely his. "I'm Philip, the new accountant." "Selena." "Yes," I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. "Welcome to the office." It took him a full 3 weeks to ask me out. 3 weeks of shared smiles in the hallways, of finding excuses to come to my desk to ask about a client, of coffees enjoyed together in the small office kitchen. When he finally summoned the courage, it was to invite me to the movies to see Love Story, a romantic film. I accepted without hesitation, of course. We dated for 2 years, following all the courtesies expected at the time. He would come to pick me up at home, talk with my parents in the living room, take me on walks in the plaza, enjoy ice cream, go to the movies when there was a good film, visit city fairs where we danced together, but always maintaining that distance carefully watched over by adults. You know what I mean? It was a lovely courtship without any rush. Philip was different from the other boys I had known. Kind, attentive, respectful. He never raised his voice, even when we disagreed. He had a calm way of resolving things, talking, explaining his point of view, and he made me feel like a queen. He would bring me flowers even when there was no special occasion. He remembered little details I mentioned. He made sure to introduce me to everyone as the most beautiful and intelligent woman in Nuevo Laredo. In 1975, he proposed to me. It was a Sunday after lunch at my parents' house. He asked to speak alone with my father, and they spent almost an hour shut away in the small carpentry workshop. When they came out, my father's eyes were shining with tears, but a smile lit up his face. Philip came over, knelt right there in front of the whole family, and took a small box out of his pocket that contained a simple but beautiful ring. "Selena," he said, his voice slightly trembling, "will you marry me and make me the happiest man in the world?" I don't have to say that I said yes, right? At that moment, the entire family burst into applause. My mother began to cry. My cousins immediately started talking about the dress, the cake, and the flowers. We got married 6 months later in a modest ceremony at the main church in Nuevo Laredo. We didn't have much money, but our families came together to organize a beautiful celebration. My mother and aunt spent weeks preparing sweets and snacks. My father made sure to build by hand the table that would hold the cake. My friends took turns helping with the decoration of the church and parish hall. My dress wasn't the most extravagant, but it was made with so much love by my mother and godmother that to me, it was the most beautiful in the world. It had delicate lace and tiny pearls sewn one by one onto the bodice with a modest yet elegant train. When I looked in the mirror that day, I could barely recognize the girl staring back at me. She looked like a princess from the stories my father used to tell me as a child. Philip was waiting for me at the altar, looking sharp in his navy blue suit, the only one he owned, but perfectly pressed and fitted for the occasion. When our eyes met, I saw tears in his. Later, he told me, "When I saw you walking into the church, Selena, I thought my heart was going to burst with happiness." We started our life together in a cozy little apartment near downtown with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a cramped bathroom. It wasn't much, but to us it felt like a palace. We decorated it with simple furniture, some made by my father and others bought on credit. I planted geraniums on the windowsills, sewed curtains in bright colors, and decorated every corner with the utmost care. Philip kept working at the accounting firm, while I, after the wedding, began making cakes and sweets to order from home. I have always had a passion for cooking, and soon my brigadeiros, flans, and party cakes became well known in the neighborhood. It wasn't as steady an income as the firm provided, but it helped balance the budget and allowed me to stay home and build our home. Because that's what we longed for, right? To have a child. From the early days of our marriage, we talked about it, imagining what it would be like, what name we would give the baby, and how we would raise them. Philip dreamed of having a boy to play soccer with and teach to fish on weekends. I dreamed of having a girl to dress in ribbons and share family recipes with, but deep down, what we really wished for was a healthy baby. It didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. The first months of our marriage were pure happiness, discovering ourselves, learning to live together, making plans, waking up every morning by his side, preparing coffee together before he left for work, greeting him with a kiss when he came home in the evening. It was a simple joy, yet so fulfilling that sometimes I was overwhelmed with fear, the fear that it was all too good to be true. At night, lying in our bed, we talked about the future. Philip dreamed of someday opening his own accounting firm. I dreamed of expanding my sweet production into something more, maybe a small bakery. And of course, we planned our family. "I want at least 3 kids, Philip would say, hugging me. A house full of kids running and laughing. 3, I would reply, pretending to be surprised. Let's start with one and then we'll talk. We laughed, we kissed, and month after month we tried to make that dream a reality. After a year of trying without success, we began to worry. Could there be a problem? We visited doctors, had tests done, and everything was fine, they said. It was just a matter of time and patience, they assured us. You are young and healthy, it will happen, and it did. In June 1977, I finally found out I was pregnant. Oh my God, what a special day. I took the test at the health center in the morning and spent the whole day imagining how I would share the news with Philip. I prepared his favorite dinner, roast beef with potato salad. Being the good northerner he was, I set the table with our lace tablecloth, saved for special occasions. I even arranged flowers in a vase. When he came home from work, he noticed all the preparations. Is it our anniversary and I forgot? He asked, worried. No, my love, I replied, barely holding back my smile, but we have something to celebrate. During dinner, we talked about his day and everyday topics. I was bursting to tell him, but waited for the right moment. As I served the dulce de leche dessert he loved, I placed a small package on the table. What is this? He asked, surprised. Open it and find out, I replied, my heart pounding. Inside the little box was a tiny pair of crocheted shoes that my neighbor had helped me make that very afternoon. Philip looked at the shoes, then at me, and back at the shoes. For a moment, he seemed not to understand. Then his eyes widened and filled with tears. Selena, you're... I nodded, already crying. We're going to have a baby, Philip. I'm 2 months pregnant. He jumped out of the chair so quickly that he nearly knocked it over. He rushed around the table and hugged me tightly, lifting me off the ground and spinning me around the small room. We laughed and cried at the same time, embracing each other, almost unable to believe that our dream was coming true. That night, as we lay in bed, Philip placed his hand on my still flat belly and stayed there in silence, as if he could already sense the baby developing inside me. I will be the best father in the world, he promised, his voice trembling. I will teach him everything I know. I will always be there. I will love this child with all my strength. I know you will, I replied, stroking his hair. You're already the best husband in the world? You're going to be an amazing father? The pregnancy went smoothly, thank God. I experienced nausea during the first few months, but it was nothing that stopped me from carrying on with my activities and my cravings for sweets. Philip became even more considerate, if that was possible. He would come home from work with whatever fruit I was craving. He gave me foot massages when they swelled at the end of the day. He read books about babies and child development with such dedication that he sometimes joked he was more pregnant than I was. In the 5th month, we found out we were having a boy. Philip was filled with joy and rushed out to tell the entire neighborhood. He will be named Carlos Philip, he announced to anyone who would listen. He's going to be an accountant like his father, or a doctor, or an engineer, whatever he wants to be. We prepared the baby's room with so much love. The walls, which were white, were now painted a soft blue with little white clouds that my cousin, who had a talent for drawing, painted all day one Sunday. The crib was a gift from my parents. My father built it with his own hands using the most beautiful wood he could find. My mother and aunts took turns making the layette, sheets, diapers, blankets, and tiny clothes that I kept in the dresser, lovingly touching each garment, imagining the face that would soon fill those clothes. The past few months were filled with pure anticipation. My belly had grown, and the baby's movements became stronger, as if he was eager to meet the world. Philip would talk to my belly every night, sharing his day, singing soft lullabies, making promises. I'll take you fishing when you're a bit older, he'd say. I'll teach you to play soccer, ride a bike, and to be a good man. Charlie arrived in this world on a cold January morning in 1978, after nearly 12 hours of labor. He was a chubby, rosy baby with a full head of black hair that surprised even the doctors. Looks like he's already got his hair styled, joked the nurse as she placed him in my arms for the first time. I felt a love I had never imagined existed. It was as if my heart had expanded to hold all this emotion. Philip, by my side, cried openly, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle that was our son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for giving me this gift." We came home 3 days later, and our lives changed completely. Sleepless nights, diaper changes, bottle preparations, interpreting cries, yet every challenge was met with such immense joy that the exhaustion barely registered. Charlie's first smile, his first tooth, the first time he rolled over on his own in bed, each milestone celebrated like a great victory. Philip became the father he had promised to be. Despite the fatigue from work, he'd come home and head straight to the crib. He'd hold our son, play with him, help with baths, tell stories. On weekends, he'd take Charlie in the stroller for walks around the city, proudly introducing his son to every acquaintance they met. "Look how smart he is," he'd say. "He recognizes our voices now. He can hold the rattle all by himself, my dear." Looking back on those early years, everything feels like a dream. We had a beautiful family, a happy marriage, and a healthy son growing strong and smart. How could I have imagined that fate was preparing such a cruel twist for us? How could I have known that the same blood running through my great-grandfather Antonio's veins, whose stories were whispered, also flowed through my little one's veins? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sometimes these memories confuse me, you know? One moment I find myself here, enjoying the aroma of homemade bread coming from the oven and listening to my little boy's laughter echoing throughout the house. The next moment, I see everything collapsing like a sandcastle. My loves, if you've made it this far in the story, please leave a comment saying I'm listening so I know there are people on the other side supporting me on this difficult journey. In the next segment, I will share how our family's golden years were before the shadows began to fall. Stay with me. Yes. Charlie's childhood was like a dream, my dears. Those early years were filled with so much joy that even now, decades later, when I close my eyes, I can smell that baby scent, hear those adorable giggles filling the house, and see those curious little eyes discovering the world. From a young age, my son showed extraordinary intelligence. At just 1 year old, he was already saying clear words, "Mama, Papa, water," while many children his age were still babbling. By the age of 2, he was already forming full sentences that left his daycare teachers amazed. "Doña Selena, this boy is a prodigy," they would say when I came to pick him up. "He talks like a little adult." Philip was so proud he could hardly contain himself. He bought a Super 8 camera in 12 hard-earned installments, an impressive luxury for our situation at the time, just to capture every moment of his son's growth. On weekends, he would turn the living room into a movie theater, projecting homemade recordings of Charlie onto the white wall, where we saw him take his first steps, blow out candles, and play in the park. "This child has a bright future ahead," he would say, his eyes shining with hope. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. He aspires to be a doctor or maybe even a politician." When Charlie turned 3 in 1981, it was already clear that we needed a bigger home. Our small apartment, which once felt like a palace, now seemed too cramped to contain that child's energy. He needed space to run, explore, and grow. Fortunately, Philip's business was thriving. He had been promoted to manager in the accounting office, and my candy sales had built a solid clientele, allowing me to make a significant contribution to the family budget. We saved for months and were able to put a down payment on a simple but spacious house in the Vista Alegre neighborhood. It had a backyard with a lush lemon tree, 3 bedrooms, one for us, another for Charlie, and one that we dreamed of turning into a room for the second child we hoped to have. There was also a small terrace in the front where I placed pots of geraniums and other flowers, turning that space into my peaceful retreat. The move to the new house coincided with Charlie starting preschool. We carefully chose Gotita de Gente School, known for its excellent reputation and located just 4 blocks from home. On his first day, I prepared him with all my love. His uniform impeccably ironed, his lunchbox filled with sandwiches, fruit, and a brigadeiro as a surprise, and his hair styled with gel that smelled like kids' cologne. "You're going to love school, my dear," I told him as we walked hand in hand. "You'll make lots of little friends, learn new things, and play a lot." He looked at me with those big serious eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as his father's, and replied with a maturity that left me amazed. "I know, Mom. I'm going to be the top student in class." And he was. Charlie adapted to school extraordinarily well. Within a few weeks, the teachers were already praising his ability to learn, his creativity in drawing, and his natural leadership among the other kids. At home, he asked to be read to every night, not children's stories, but adult books, as he used to say. At just 4 years old, he could already recognize all the letters and form some simple words. Philip, beaming with pride, brought home increasingly challenging children's books, puzzles with more pieces, and educational games that encouraged critical thinking. He would spend hours on the living room floor building block cities with his son, weaving imaginative tales about courageous princes and mysterious dragons, patiently answering his child's endless questions about how things worked, from clocks to stars, airplanes to ants. "Why is the sky blue, Dad? How do fish breathe underwater? Where does the sun go at night?" The questions never stopped. Philip was committed to finding real scientific answers, never underestimating his son's intelligence. Our daily routine found a comforting rhythm during those years. Philip left early for work. I took Charlie to school, then returned home to prepare the day's orders of sweets. In the afternoon, I'd pick up our little boy, and we'd spend a few hours together doing homework, enjoying the yard, and cooking dinner that Philip would find waiting for him when he came home from work. During school breaks, we took little trips, usually to visit Charlie's paternal grandparents in Monterey or to spend a few days at the beach in Tampico. They weren't luxurious vacations. We stayed in modest inns. We brought homemade food to save money, but those were precious moments filled with simple joys like building sandcastles, savoring ice cream on the beach, and sailing the Panuco River. I remember one such day in January 1983 when Charlie was 5 years old. We were at the beach in Tampico on a sunny afternoon. Philip had gone to buy popsicles for us, and meanwhile I watched Charlie playing in the wet sand, completely absorbed in creating a complex system of canals to channel the seawater. Suddenly, an older boy, about 8 years old, ran over and deliberately stomped right in the middle of his construction, destroying everything. I stood up immediately, ready to step in and comfort my son, expecting him to start crying. But to my surprise, Charlie didn't shed a single tear. He looked at the boy with an unusual calmness, and in a voice that didn't sound like a child's, asked, "Are you going to regret this?" The older boy laughed mockingly and replied, "And what are you going to do, baby? Cry to your mommy?" Charlie kept staring at him, motionless, with a look that briefly reminded me of the stories my great-grandfather used to tell. Without warning, he grabbed a handful of wet sand and threw it directly into the boy's eyes, causing him to fall back, screaming in pain. "Charlie!" I shouted as I rushed over. "What did you do?" He turned to me, his expression returning to that of my sweet boy, his eyes wide with fear, as if he didn't even understand what he'd just done. "He destroyed my castle," he said. "Mommy," he replied, trembling. I was furious. The situation was resolved quickly. I apologized to the other boy's mother, explaining that Charlie had never behaved like this before and that it had just been an impulsive reaction. On the way back to the inn, I had a serious talk with my son about the importance of controlling our impulses and how hurting others is never the answer. Even when we're really angry, Charlie, we can't hurt people. Do you understand? He nodded, showing genuine remorse. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I don't know what happened. It was like someone else threw the sand." At that moment, I saw it as a child's way of avoiding responsibility. Only many years later did I realize that maybe, just maybe, there was more truth in that statement than I had imagined, although it was just an isolated incident overall. Charlie was a sweet, loving, and obedient child. Neighbors, teachers, and family friends always praised how polite, helpful and intelligent he was. He was a golden boy, they said, and he truly was, at least during those golden years of childhood. When Charlie turned 7 in 1985, something happened that would deeply affect our family. Philip, who had been working double shifts at the office, finally managed to gather enough capital to start his own business. With the help of a partner, George, a college friend, he founded Border Accounting, a modest office but full of great ambitions. It was a time of hard work, filled with sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends. Philip would come home exhausted, but his eyes sparkled with the light of dreams beginning to take shape. I did everything I could to support him. I prepared healthy meals for him to take to work. I made sure the house was always tidy, preserving those few hours at home so he could rest or enjoy quality time with his son. Charlie, though young, seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He didn't complain when his father missed a school presentation or arrived too late for the goodnight kiss. Instead, he showed interest in the new business. He asked to visit the office on weekends. He was fascinated watching Philip explain balances, taxes, and accounting. "When I grow up, I'll work with you, Dad," he once declared, sitting in the swivel chair that seemed huge on him. "We'll be partners." Philip smiled brightly and ruffled his son's messy hair. "Of course, champ. The company will be called Philip & Son. What do you think?" Philip's hard work paid off. In just 2 years, Frontera Accounting had built a respectable client portfolio, including some of the most prominent merchants in Nuevo Laredo and even some from across the border in Laredo, Texas. With the business thriving, we could finally fulfill other dreams. We replaced the old Volkswagen with a brand new Chevrolet. What a luxury that car was, my goodness. We renovated the kitchen at home. We enrolled Charlie in a private school, the best in the city. In 1988, when our son turned 10, we decided to throw a special birthday party. In previous years, we had celebrated simply with a cake at home, a few friends invited, and modest gifts. But now that our financial situation was more stable, we wanted to make it big. We rented the hall of a commercial club and hired themed decorations featuring superheroes. Charlie was a huge fan of Spider-Man. I ordered a 3-tier cake decorated with all the comic characters he collected. Philip bought a new bike, the ultimate dream gift for our little boy, and I made a custom superhero vest with the initial CF embroidered on the chest. It was an unforgettable party. More than 30 kids showed up. There were games organized by professional entertainers. We handed out elaborate party favors that I had prepared myself. Charlie was glowing, running back and forth, greeting his friends, and proudly showing off the vest I had made. When we started singing Las Mañanitas with our son in the center, surrounded by friends and family, exchanging looks of pure joy with Philip, I thought there could be no more perfect moment. We had created something wonderful, something solid, a fulfilling marriage, an exceptional son, and a stable financial situation. The future looked bright, full of opportunity. I never could have imagined that soon everything we had built with such love would start to fall apart. The small, subtle signs we sometimes noticed in Charlie's behavior, which we preferred to ignore, were just the prelude to a devastating storm on the horizon. The following years passed in a pleasant routine. Charlie thrived increasingly at school, always near the top of his class, participating in math olympiads, science fairs, and writing contests. By age 12, he was already reading complex books and kept a journal where he expressed surprisingly mature reflections. He showed many talents, from playing guitar, a gift for his 13th birthday, to drawing with almost photographic precision. Yet we also began to notice certain peculiarities. He was an intense child. When something caught his interest, he would dive deeply into it, almost obsessively. He went through phases where he was obsessed with dinosaurs, then astronomy, then with quantum physics. He studied subjects with unusual depth for his age. He also had a more reclusive side. Though popular among his peers, he seemed to enjoy his own company more, spending hours in his room reading, writing, and drawing. "Is this normal?" I asked Philip one night after realizing Charlie had spent the entire Saturday locked in his room working on a secret project he refused to show us. "The other kids his age always want to go out and play in the street. Our son is special, Selena," Philip replied calmly. He has a brilliant mind. It's understandable that he doesn't share the same interests as the other boys. Einstein was like that in his childhood too, did you know? I accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it. It was easier to see our son as a misunderstood genius than to accept that something might be wrong. And in reality, most of the time, Charlie was simply an exceptionally bright and somewhat introspective teenager. He had friends, took part in school activities, and talked to us about what interested him, his future aspirations. In 1993, when he turned 15, Philip decided it was time to involve him more actively in the family business, not as an official worker. Of course, he was still too young, but as an apprentice during vacations and some Saturdays, Charlie would accompany his father to the office, learning the basics of accounting and observing how a business was managed. To our surprise and delight, he showed an innate talent for numbers, organization, and the logic of balances and reports. In just a few weeks, he was already able to perform simple tasks without supervision, file documents, input data into spreadsheets, and handle phone calls. Philip was immensely proud. "He has a knack for business, Selena," he would say excitedly. "When he finishes college, he will revolutionize the company. I'm convinced that under his leadership, Frontera accounting will expand throughout the state." Those were excellent times. Charlie seemed to have found a purpose, something that channeled his intense mental energy productively. At home, we talked about the future. He would study accounting, possibly in Monterey or even Mexico City. Then he would come back to gradually take over his father's responsibilities. Everything seemed to be going in the right direction, carefully organized and promising, until in 1995, shortly after Charlie turned 17, I began to notice the first significant changes in his behavior. It all started with small things. He, who had always been so organized, began to mess up his room. Clothes strewn across the floor, books piled up chaotically, open notebooks scattered on the bed. His sleep, once regular, became erratic. Sometimes I found him awake at 3 a.m, frantically writing in notebooks he quickly hid whenever I entered his room. "I'm just studying, Mom," he'd say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an important exam tomorrow," even though it was vacation and no exam was scheduled at all. His appetite changed too. He used to enjoy eating, especially the meals I prepared with care. Now he barely took a bite. He was visibly losing weight, and his clothes started to hang loosely on him. "Are you eating well, son?" I asked one night, worried as I watched him push the rice from one side of the plate to the other. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm not hungry," he replied curtly. "And stop treating me like a kid, Mom. I know how to take care of myself." That lack of respect was new. Charlie had always been polite and respectful. Now he responded impatiently, got irritated easily, and isolated himself more and more. Philip tried to talk to him man to man, thinking it might just be typical teenage rebellion. "Son, your mother is worried, so am I. If something's bothering you, you can tell us. We're here to help." "There's nothing wrong with me," Charlie snapped, slamming his bedroom door. We started getting calls from the school. Charlie, the model student, was skipping classes. And when he did attend, he seemed apathetic and unable to focus. He was too restless, interrupting teachers with off-topic questions or comments. His grades, which had always been excellent, plummeted. "We're worried," said the school counselor at a tense meeting. "Carlos has always been one of our best students. This sudden change in behavior could be a sign of serious problems. Maybe drugs, maybe depression. Have you noticed anything at home?" Of course, we had noticed, but hearing it from a professional in the formal setting of that room with framed diplomas on the walls made it all painfully real. It wasn't just a phase. There was genuinely something wrong with our son. We decided to take him to a doctor. Convincing him wasn't easy. He shouted, resisted. He accused us of thinking he was crazy. But Philip stood firm for the first time, using an authoritative tone he rarely needed. "This isn't a matter of choice, Carlos. You're going to the doctor, and that's final." The general practitioner ran a series of tests, blood work, urine analysis, and even a CT scan to rule out neurological problems. "Everything looks physically fine," he assured us. but I strongly recommend a psychological or psychiatric evaluation. The word psychiatric hit our family like a bomb. Philip was hesitant at first. My son isn't crazy, doctor. But I insisted. I began to make connections I didn't want to face. Stories about my great-grandfather Antonio, who was Charlie's age, 17, just when the mental issues of my great-grandfather reportedly started showing up. It's just a consultation, Philip, I argued, trying to sound calmer than I felt. If it's nothing, great, but if there's something that needs treatment, the sooner we find out, the better. Reluctantly, he finally agreed. I made an appointment with Dr. Morris, the only psychiatrist in town, an older man with a solid reputation, though with somewhat old-fashioned ways. Charlie refused to go the morning of the appointment. He locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out no matter what we said. "Do you want to admit me?" he shouted from behind the door. "You want to get rid of me like you did with the old crazy man in the family?" That sent a chill down my spine. We had never mentioned Charlie anything about my great-grandfather. How could he know? When we finally persuaded him to come out of the bathroom, Philip threatened to break down the door. He was acting differently, too calm, almost at peace, with a strange smile on his face. "All right," he said submissively. "Let's go to the doctor. You're right, I'm not well." That drastic change in behavior should have warned me, but I was so relieved I didn't question it. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of the car, Charlie softly murmured a melody I didn't recognize. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed that his eyes were glassy, fixed on some invisible point, and his lips moved as if he were talking to someone. It was then, while watching my son through the car's rearview mirror on the way to the psychiatrist, that I saw for the first time what I had feared so much. In my own son's eyes, the same vacant stare they said my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister. And I knew with devastating certainty that my family's nightmare had returned. The consultation with Dr. Maurice was both revealing and terrifying. At first, Charlie was cooperative, answering questions with apparent clarity, but when the doctor began probing into his recent behavioral changes, something shifted. My son started speaking faster, jumping from one topic to another, using complicated words in sentences that barely made sense. "The numbers talk to me, doctor," he said, with his eyes shining with feverish intensity. "They have colors and textures. The 7 is red and rough like sandpaper. The 3 is blue and slippery like soap. The universe is encoded in mathematical patterns that only I can see." Then suddenly he fell silent, staring at an empty corner of the room. When the doctor asked what he was thinking, Charlie murmured softly, "He is here. The man in the hat tells me you can't be trusted." It was as if the ground opened up beneath my feet. Philip squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, though I barely noticed. My attention was completely focused on our son, who now seemed to be having an animated conversation with the void. "Dr. Maurice's diagnosis was cautious but clear. Your son shows symptoms consistent with the schizophrenia spectrum disorder, including auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. This age is typical for onset, especially in males." "But he was always so normal," protested Philip, his voice breaking. "So intelligent, so balanced." "Schizophrenia often affects brilliant people," the doctor explained. "Initial psychotic episodes are usually preceded by a period of normal functioning. It's a deceptive illness. That's why when we notice the signs, the process has often already advanced." Mozart, we left that appointment with the prescription for medication and the recommendation to seek more specialized treatment in Monterey, where there were psychiatrists with more experience in cases like Charlie's. The drive home was quiet and heavy. In the back seat, our son had fallen silent again, staring out the window with a vacant expression. That night, after putting Charlie to bed, he accepted the first pill without any resistance, which surprised me. Philip and I sat on the terrace and hands intertwined, trying to come to terms with the new reality before us. "Everything will be okay," Philip kept saying, more to himself than to me. "We'll get the best treatment, the best doctors. Our son will overcome this." I wanted to believe him. God knows my wishes, but deep down, I understood that our lives would never be the same again, that the best years were behind us. Now we were facing a dark, uncertain, and terrifying road. What we didn't yet know was how devastating this journey would become. We couldn't imagine that within months we would lose not just our son's sanity, but also the pillar holding our family together, and that fate had an even harsher test in store for us when the violence that ran through my great-grandfather's blood would finally erupt brutally through my own son. But that, my friends, is the subject of the next chapter of this painful story that has been my life, a story I feel compelled to share no matter how difficult, in the hope of helping other families fighting the invisible monster of mental illness. I would truly appreciate it if you like this video. In the weeks after the diagnosis, we found ourselves in a strange limbo. The medications prescribed by Dr. Maurice seemed to ease Charlie's most obvious symptoms, the hallucinations, the agitation, the incoherent speech. He started sleeping better, eating more regularly, and after 2 weeks of rest at home, he returned to school. We began to believe, even if only for a brief and blessed moment, that perhaps the doctor had exaggerated the situation, that maybe it wasn't schizophrenia, but just an isolated episode of stress, mental exhaustion of a brilliant teenager under a lot of pressure. What made us deceive ourselves like this? In March 1995, following Dr. Maurice's recommendation, we went to Monterrey for a consultation with a specialist, Dr. Enrique Vasconcelos, a renowned psychiatrist with extensive experience in psychotic disorders. His clinic was located in a modern building in the San Pedro Garza Garcia neighborhood, in stark contrast to our doctor's outdated practice in Nuevo Laredo. Friendly receptionists, a waiting room with comfortable couches, up-to-date magazines, and a decorative water fountain creating a relaxing atmosphere. Charlie was noticeably very cooperative that day. He dressed appropriately, engaged in clear conversation during the 3-hour drive, and even joked with his father about the chaotic traffic in the capital. Upon arrival, he quietly sat in the waiting room, flipping through a scientific magazine with genuine interest. "I feel much better," he assured us before going into the office. "I think these medications are really working." Philip squeezed my hand, a spark of hope shining in his tired eyes. "See, our boy is coming back." The consultation lasted nearly 2 hours. Dr. Vasconcelos first spoke with Charlie alone, then with us, and finally brought all 3 of us together. His approach was different, less formal, warmer than Dr. Maurice's, but just as thorough. He took a detailed history, examining the family background. A chill ran down my spine when he mentioned my great-grandfather Antonio. He reviewed the medications and ordered additional tests. When the time finally came to share the diagnosis, his expression turned kind yet serious. "Carlos shows a picture quite consistent with paranoid schizophrenia." He explained using technical terms that swirled through my anxious mind. The referenced delusions, auditory hallucinations, emotional flatness, combined with periods of lucidity, all point to a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, likely with a significant hereditary component. "But today seems to be fine," Philip insisted, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Almost." The doctor nodded understandingly. "This is a common feature of the illness, especially in its early stages. There are fluctuations, periods of apparent normality, followed by relapses. The medications help manage symptoms but do not cure the disease. Will he be able to live a normal life?" I asked. That was the question that tormented me the most since this nightmare began. Will he be able to study, work, start a family one day? With the right treatment, many patients can achieve a satisfactory quality of life, the doctor replied, choosing his words carefully. "However, I must be honest, Carlos will face significant challenges. Schizophrenia is a chronic illness that requires ongoing medical attention, regular medication, and possibly lifestyle adjustments." So we left that appointment with a new prescription, more advanced medications, adjusted dosages, and referrals for complementary therapies such as psychotherapy, occupational therapy, and family support groups. Dr. Vasconcelos suggested considering the option of Charlie receiving treatment in Monterrey, where more specialized resources are available? Think it over carefully, he advised. It's a major decision. Moving to another city can be stressful, but the benefits of having access to a specialized multidisciplinary team might outweigh the drawbacks. On the way back to Nuevo Laredo, we discussed the options. Moving to Monterrey would mean leaving our home, Philip's business, my small network of candy clients, and our entire social life behind. However, staying would mean relying solely on Dr. Morris, who was already elderly and whose knowledge of current treatments was outdated. Charlie, sitting quietly in the back seat, hardly spoke. When I asked him what he thought about moving to the capital, he just shrugged. "It doesn't matter," he replied, staring out the window. "The man in the hat is coming with me anyway." A chill ran down my spine. The man in the hat, the hallucination he experienced most often, hadn't been mentioned for days. I thought the medication had completely taken effect. I exchanged a worried look with Philip, who gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. We decided to wait a little longer to give the new treatments a chance and see how Charlie would respond in the coming weeks before considering such a drastic step as moving. Philip spoke with George, his partner, about the possibility of temporarily reducing his workload to be more present at home. As for me, I rearranged my work schedule, prioritizing older and more profitable clients so I could spend more time caring for our son. For a few weeks, it seemed we had made the right decision. Charlie returned to school full-time and resumed some of his usual activities. The new medications caused side effects. He complained of dry mouth, daytime drowsiness, and slight trembling in his hands, but they seemed to keep the psychotic symptoms under control. The weekly appointments with Dr. Maurice went smoothly and routinely. It was in May, almost 2 months after the consultation in Monterrey, that things began to unravel again. It all started when I found the pills, dozens of them, hidden inside a book on Charlie's shelf. He hadn't taken his medication in weeks, possibly since we came back from the capital. I confronted him directly, initially calmly, trying to understand. "Son, why did you hide the medication? You know you need it to feel better." He answered with a coldness I didn't recognize. "They make me slow, heavy. I can't think clearly when I take them, but the delusions come back without them." Charlie, the voices, the hallucinations, a strange smile forming on his lips. "And who says they're delusions, Mom? What if I really can see things you can't? What if the man in the hat is real, almost invisible to ordinary minds?" The conversation quickly grew tense. From that moment on, Charlie became restless. He began pacing back and forth in the room, waving his hands as if he were speaking to someone only he could see. I tried to stop him and calm him down, but he pushed me with unexpected force, making me fall onto the bed. "Don't touch me," he yelled, his eyes wild with fear and rage. "He says you want to poison me, that the medication is poison." Philip came home from work amid this chaos. I had never seen him look so frightened as he did at that moment, standing in the doorway watching our 17-year-old son in a psychotic episode throwing out delusional accusations at us. We called Dr. Maurice, who arrived quickly at our house. For the first time, he mentioned the possibility of hospitalization. If he's not taking the medication voluntarily and displays aggressive behavior with intense persecutory delusions, a hospital stay for stabilization might be necessary, the doctor explained. Meanwhile, in the next room, Charlie was still talking to himself, now in a softer, conspiratorial tone. The idea of admitting our son was breaking our hearts. We imagined psychiatric hospitals as bleak, dehumanizing places full of sedated patients and harsh treatments. However, Dr. Maurice reassured us that things have improved a lot over the past decades. The San Carlos Psychiatric Hospital in Monterrey has an excellent youth unit, he said. Their approach is humane, focused on stabilization and reintegration. It's not about long-term stays, just the time needed to adjust the medication and make sure Carlos takes it regularly. Though hesitant, we agreed to consider this option. But before we could decide, Charlie seemed to suddenly improve. The next morning, he came downstairs for breakfast, calm, almost serene, and apologized for his behavior the night before. He promised he would take his medication on schedule. He said he had gone through a rough patch, but now felt clearer. "It was just a stumble, Mom," he said, as he obediently took the pill he had placed next to his glass of juice. "This won't happen again." I wanted to believe him so much, and for a few days I truly did. I kept a close eye on every dose of his medication, making sure he actually swallowed it, not hiding it under his tongue like I later found out he was doing. Charlie returned to his usual routine: school, home, sometimes a visit to his father's office on weekends. He seemed stable, almost normal. Just when we let our guard down, the unexpected happened. One Friday in June, Charlie didn't come home from school at the usual time. I started to worry at 5 p.m. By 6, anxiety had taken over me. I called all the friends I knew from school and even the small police station in the area. No one had any information. Philip went out to look for him, checking the places our son usually went: the main square, the public library, the soccer field on the edge of town. Nothing. When he came back around 9 at night, his face was pale and his red eyes seemed to hold back tears. "Let's go to the police station," he decided. "This isn't normal. Something must have happened." We were about to leave when we heard the sound of keys in the door. Charlie walked in with messy hair, dirty and wrinkled clothes, and a strong smell of alcohol coming from him. "Where have you been?" Philip almost shouted, a mix of relief and anger in his voice. We had been desperate because of his absence. Charlie smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I went to meet some friends in Laredo, people who really understand me." Laredo was the American city just across the border, just a few steps from downtown Nuevo Laredo. The two cities were practically connected, separated only by the Rio Grande, the famous border between Mexico and the United States. "What friends?" I asked, noticing that his pupils were dilated, not just from the alcohol. "What did you take, Charlie?" He laughed, a bitter sound, almost grown up. "Whatever makes me feel good, Mom. Whatever drives away the voices. Better than those pills you forced me to take." Philip stepped closer, grabbing his son's arm. "Did you take drugs? Answer me. What happened?" What happened next was so fast, I barely had time to react. Charlie pulled away suddenly and quickly threw a punch at his father's face. Philip recoiled, more shocked than hurt, blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Don't touch me, Charlie," she screamed, her eyes wild and bulging. "None of you touched me. You are not my parents. My real parents have been replaced." It was the typical delirium of Capgras syndrome. I learned this term later during my distressing research about the illness. It's the belief that close people, usually relatives, have been replaced by identical imposters. A common symptom in certain types of paranoid schizophrenia. That night was pure torment. Charlie swung between moments of extreme aggression, smashing things and threatening us, and episodes of sheer terror, curled up in a corner, begging that the imposters wouldn't hurt him. We called Dr. Maurice, who arrived with 2 nurses from the small-town hospital. Physical restraint was necessary to control our son and give him a sedative. "We have no choice," the doctor said, watching Charlie finally fall asleep on the living room sofa, surrounded by the wreckage of objects he had destroyed in his rage. "He needs immediate hospitalization." The next day, a gloomy Saturday that seemed to echo the sadness in our hearts, we made the hardest journey of our lives. Charlie, still under the sedative's effect, barely registered what was happening. We placed him in the back seat of the car, wrapped in a blanket, and began the long drive to Monterey. The admission process at San Carlos Hospital was surprisingly smooth, though emotionally heartbreaking. We filled out forms, signed consents, spoke with doctors, social workers, and psychologists. And we told the story over and over. The first symptoms, the diagnosis, the refusal to take medication, the violent episode from the previous night. By the time we said goodbye, Charlie was a little more aware, beginning to understand what was happening. The fear in his eyes as he realized we were leaving him there among strangers in a strange place nearly broke my resolve. "Mom, don't do this," he begged, gripping my hand tightly. For a moment he was my little boy again, not the troubled young man from the night before. "Don't leave me here. I promise I'll behave. I'll take the medicine. I'll do everything right. Philip, standing beside me, swallowed hard, tears streaming freely down his face after a night of horror. It's for your own good, son, just until you're better. But I'm already better, Charlie insisted, looking around frantically at the cold white walls of the waiting room. Please, Dad, Mom, don't leave me here. It took all my strength to let go of his hand and step back as the nurses came to take him away. The scream he let out, a primal sound of pure suffering, still echoes in my nightmares. You're going to pay for this, he shouted as they led him down the hall. It was no longer my son's voice, but something twisted by anger and illness. You're not my parents. My parents would never leave me in a mental institution. In the car, driving home without our son, the silence between Philip and me was heavy, almost suffocating. Words felt inadequate to express the depth of pain we both carried. He drove mechanically, eyes fixed on the road, occasionally raising a hand to wipe away a stray tear. We did what we had to do, he finally murmured halfway home. We had no other choice. I know, I replied, though secretly I wasn't so sure. Why does doing the right thing hurt so much? The days that followed were strange, almost ghostly. The house, once filled with Charlie's energy, even in his hardest moments, now felt like a tomb. His room, the empty chair at the dining table, the silent mornings where we used to hear his hurried footsteps getting ready for school, each absence was a wound. We called the hospital every day, hoping for news. At first, the information was limited. He's adjusting, they said. A period of adjustment is normal. During the first week, we couldn't visit him. That's part of the protocol for patients in acute crisis, they explained. Finally, after 10 days that felt like an eternity, we were allowed to see our son. We made the 3-hour journey back to Monterey, hearts heavy with hope and fear. The hospital was not the dark place I had imagined. The youth wing, in particular, turned out to be surprisingly welcoming. Painted walls in soft colors, a common room filled with games and books, and simple yet clean rooms shared by a maximum of 2 patients. Charlie shared his room with a younger boy who seemed to have some kind of mood disorder. When he saw us in the visiting area, he didn't show the joy we had quietly hoped for. He appeared calm, almost detached. A side effect of the medication, the nurse explained later. We talked for nearly an hour, covering trivial and superficial topics. He asked about home, the neighbors, and Philip's job. He avoided discussing his condition, the treatment, and when he might come home. Only as we were getting ready to leave did he finally look us in the eye. A clear, bright gaze, the same look our Charlie used to have before. I'm sorry for what I did, he whispered. I wasn't myself that night. Philip hugged him, almost laughing. We know, son, no one blames you. We just want you to be okay. I will be, he promised, returning the hug with a surprising strength. The doctors here are competent. I'm taking the medication. The voices are quieter, farther away. We went home feeling more relieved with renewed hope. Maybe, after all, the hospitalization had been the right choice. Perhaps our son was on the road to recovery. The following weeks followed a pattern. We visited Charlie every Saturday, noticing subtle improvements, his livelier expression, more coherent conversation, his interest slowly returning to things that used to fascinate him, books, science, and his father's business. The doctors spoke of remarkable progress, successful medication adjustments, and positive prospects for an upcoming discharge. In July, nearly a month after his admission, we had a meeting with the entire medical team, psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, and occupational therapist. They all agreed that Charlie was responding very well to the treatment. We discussed the next steps, discharge from the hospital, outpatient follow-up, and the possibility of him returning to school in the second semester. It's crucial to establish a structured routine, but without applying too much pressure, the psychiatrist advised. The return to normal activities must be gradual and supervised. We decided that Philip would temporarily rent a small apartment in Monterey. I would move there with Charlie so he could continue his outpatient treatment in the city while readjusting to life outside the hospital. Philip would divide his time between Nuevo Laredo, where he was needed at the accounting office, and Monterrey, coming back on weekends and holidays. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it was temporary, Philip assured me, although I could see the unease in his eyes, not just from the separation, but also from the financial strain. Renting a place in the city, maintaining 2 residences, and making regular trips would put a significant strain on our budget. The most important thing was that our son received the appropriate treatment. By the end of July, Charlie was discharged. He left the hospital changed, thinner, with a more serious and mature expression that matched his 17 years, but also more balanced, more present, and more aware of his condition and the need to take care of himself. "I won't miss my medications again," he promised as we loaded his few belongings into the car. "I learned the hard way what happens when I do." Our rented apartment was in the country neighborhood, not as upscale as San Pedro Garza Garcia, where Dr. Vasconcelos had his clinic, but still a nice area with easy access to the hospital for follow-ups. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a living room, a compact kitchen, and a bathroom, but cozy in its own way. I furnished it with the basics, trying to create a warm atmosphere with the limited resources we had. Philip was with us the first weekend, helping organize everything, making sure we were comfortable and safe. When he left Sunday night, I felt a knot in my heart deeper than the usual nostalgia of a couple temporarily apart. It was a premonition, a vague but persistent fear that something wasn't right, that our apparent victory over the illness was fragile and fleeting. "Everything will be fine," Philip reassured me, giving me a tight hug before getting into the car for his long journey back. "We're on the right track now." The first few weeks in Monterrey turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. Charlie was diligently following his treatment. He attended therapy 3 times a week, had psychiatric appointments every 2 weeks, and took his medication on time. He also started participating in a support group for young people dealing with mental health challenges, where, for the first time, he could talk to people who truly understood what he was going through. I enrolled him in a prep course for the college entrance exam, which was less demanding than regular school, but still mentally stimulating. On good days, he reminded me of the old Charlie, curious, articulate, and full of dreams for the future. "I still want to go to college," he told me one night at our modest kitchen table. "Maybe not accounting like Dad wanted. I'm thinking about psychology, you know? I want to understand better what's going on inside here," he said, pointing to his own head with an ironic smile. Of course, there were difficult days too, moments when the medication felt too strong, leaving him inert and distant. Days when side effects like tremors, dry mouth, and dizziness frustrated and annoyed him. Days when the voices, though quieter, still whispered doubts and stirred fears. "The man with the hat still shows up from time to time," he admitted during a joint session with his therapist, "not as clear as before, but more like a shadow at the corner of his vision. And I don't believe him anymore. I know he's not real, but he's still there." Philip came to visit us every weekend, just as he promised. He would arrive Friday night, tired from the journey and a demanding work week, but always with a smile and gifts, a new book for Charlie, flowers for me, and traditional sweets from the border that we knew we wouldn't find in Monterrey's capital. We cherished those 2 precious days as a regular family. We went to the movies, strolled through Fundidora Park, and explored the old neighborhood. Charlie seemed genuinely happier in those moments, as if his father's presence completed a circuit, restoring a vital energy that was missing during the weekdays. As September arrived, marking 2 months into this arrangement, we began considering the possibility of returning to Nuevo Laredo. Dr. Vasconcelos remained cautiously optimistic. During a consultation that Philip also attended, he acknowledged that Carlos was making good progress. However, he still recommended a few more months of intensive care in the capital before thinking about going back to their hometown, as Carlos's stability was still relatively recent. Philip sighed, visibly exhausted. The burden of weekly travel, dual responsibilities, managing the office at the border, and supporting the family in Monterey was taking its toll. "I will follow the doctor's recommendation," he agreed, always prioritizing his son's well-being over any personal convenience. "But I need to find a more sustainable solution for the office. I can't keep being away 4 days a week indefinitely." The solution came in the form of an unexpected proposal. George, Philip's partner, suggested opening an accounting branch in Monterey. He would take charge of the main office in Nuevo Laredo, while Philip handled the new operation in the capital, allowing the family to be together permanently. "It's a financial risk," Philip admitted when discussing the idea. "Setting up a branch in a big city with tough competition has its challenges, but it could be our best chance to stay together without compromising Charlie's treatment." The decision was made. In the months that followed, while Charlie continued his treatment, Philip dedicated himself entirely to developing the new branch, searching for a suitable commercial space, managing all the bureaucracy, and building a client base from the ground up. It was a time of intense work for him and adjustment for all of us. October arrived with a sense of a fresh start. The apartment we had rented was replaced by a larger one, better suited to establishing a permanent home. We brought in new furniture and decorated the space with items we had brought from our home at the border, trying to create a place that combined family warmth with the excitement of a new beginning. Charlie seemed to flourish in this new setting. The constant presence of his father, the stability of an established routine, and the continuity of treatment all contributed to his gradual progress. He began to talk about concrete plans for the entrance exam the following year, potential universities, and careers that interested him. In November, on the eve of his 18th birthday, we had one of the most significant conversations since his illness began. We were in the living room after dinner, just the two of us. Philip had gone to the office for an urgent matter with a client. "Mom," he started with a hesitant voice, his eyes fixed on the turned-off television in front of us. "Do you think I'll always be like this? Always sick?" His question took me by surprise, even though I knew he had been carrying it inside for a long time. I took a deep breath, searching for the most sincere and loving answer I could give. "I think you will always need care, son. Medications, checkups. Schizophrenia has no cure, at least not yet. But that doesn't mean you can't have a full, happy, and productive life. How can I find happiness knowing that at any moment I could lose control, that the voices might roar louder, that I could hurt those I love, just like I almost did with Dad?" That question overflowed with anguish, and my heart tightened. I took his hands in mine, feeling how cold they were despite the warmth of the night. "You are not your illness, Charlie. You are so much more than that. You are brilliant, sensitive, talented. You are fully aware of your situation. You are receiving treatment and learning to recognize the warning signs. That already represents half the journey." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "Sometimes I fear I won't be able to live a normal life. A girlfriend, children, a career. Many people living with schizophrenia achieve all of that, son. It won't be easy. It won't be exactly as you imagined when you were a child, but it is possible. And your father and I will be by your side every step of the way." A melancholic smile appeared on his lips. "You have been wonderful. After everything I did, how I behaved, you're still here rebuilding your life because of me, because we love you more than anything in the world. It has always been that way since the moment you were just a promise in my womb. It always will be." That night, lying in bed waiting for Philip to come home, I reflected on our journey so far. The devastating diagnosis, the painful hospitalization, the move to Monterey, the slow rebuilding of our lives around a new reality. Without a doubt, it had been the hardest year of our lives, but also a year of discoveries, of strengthening bonds, of gaining a deeper understanding of what truly matters. I fell asleep with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. A fragile peace, perhaps built on still unstable foundations, but peace nonetheless. unaware that it would be the last quiet night I would have for a long, long time. Fate, still unsatisfied with the trials it had put before us, was about to deal its cruelest and most ruthless blow. An impact that would not only shatter the fragile stability we had found, but would also irreparably separate me from the man who had been my refuge for more than 20 years. That November night in 1995 began like so many others. Philip called to let me know he would be home a little late. A major client at the border was facing serious problems with his tax return and needed urgent help. "Don't wait up for me, just go to sleep," his tired voice said over the phone. "I might be a while." I had dinner with Charlie. We watched a show on TV and talked about his plans for his upcoming 18th birthday. Around 10, he took his night medication and went to bed. I stayed up a bit longer in the living room, knitting a sweater that would be Philip's Christmas gift, trying not to check the clock every 5 minutes, 11 p.m., 1 a.m. Eventually, fatigue won out. I left a note on the kitchen table that said, "There's food in the oven. I love you." Then I went to sleep, imagining that I'd find Philip beside me when I woke up, like so many other nights when he'd come home late. The phone rang at 4:27 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand, those bright red numbers glowing in the dark room. 4:27. The moment my life changed forever. It was George, Philip's partner, calling from Nuevo Laredo. His voice quivered so much I could barely make out the first words. Something about an accident, a fight in a bar. The police were trying to communicate. "Calm down, George," I said as I sat on the bed, my heart racing and a heavy feeling in my chest. "What are you talking about? What accident, Philip?" "He's dead." The words hit me like a punch, stealing my breath and making everything spin around me. It couldn't be true. Philip was in Monterey working at the office. George must be confused, maybe drunk, or perhaps this was some cruel joke. It didn't make any sense. I replied more firmly than I had expected. "Philip is here in Monterey. He stayed late at the office yesterday." A heavy silence took over the conversation. Then George's voice, now choked with sobs, said he was here alone. He had arrived yesterday afternoon to handle a matter concerning Alberto Mendoza, a client from the winery. He said he would return to Monterey in the morning. My mind couldn't process the information. Philip hadn't mentioned anything about a trip to Nuevo Laredo. Why would he hide that from me unless... "What happened, George?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Tell me exactly what happened." Slowly, through painful pauses and confusing explanations, the truth began to emerge. Philip had gone to Nuevo Laredo that day without telling me, to personally deal with that client's issue. Once he finished his work, he headed to the Juco Bar, a simple yet respectable place in the city center, to meet some friends before spending the night at our old house that we still kept. The Juco Bar was dangerously close to the border, as we used to call the line with the United States, an area where the laws of both countries overlapped, where smuggling was common and where criminal groups operated with relative freedom. That night, one of those groups, the Norteños, a gang known for smuggling drinks and cigarettes, were at the bar. There were about 8 men, already drunk, causing a ruckus and bothering the other patrons. Philip, always diplomatic, tried to calm the situation when one of them started to harass the waitress. "Leave her alone," he would have said, placing himself between the criminal and the young woman. He was just doing his job. Simple, polite words that cost him his life. The man was not satisfied with the intervention. He pulled out a knife, one of those large ones used in households, and without warning stabbed Philip in the abdomen, a single deep and precise thrust. The attacker's companions immediately dragged him away, crossing the border into U.S. territory, where they would be safe from the Mexican police. Philip was rushed to the small local hospital, but the bleeding was too severe. He died on the operating table, with no time to say goodbye, no chance to fight back. At 3:48 in the morning, his death was confirmed. When I hung up the phone, I was frozen in bed, unable to cry, scream, or do anything. A strange numbness took over my body, as if I were watching everything from afar, as if I were someone else receiving the news that her husband, just 20 years old, had been brutally murdered in a bar fight. I don't know how long I stayed in that paralyzed state, maybe minutes, maybe hours. By the time I finally moved, the sky was beginning to lighten. My first clear thought was about Charlie. How could I tell our son, already so weakened by illness, that his father had been brutally murdered? How could I protect him from the shock that would surely threaten all the progress he had made in recent months? I decided to wait for him to wake up naturally. There was no rush. Nothing would change the fact that Philip was dead, and I needed those precious moments to process at least a little of what had happened, to find the strength my son would need. I took a hot bath, letting the tears finally flow, mixing with the water. I dressed automatically, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Charlie appeared around 8, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes still a bit cloudy from the medication he had taken the night before. He smiled at me with a sleepy, innocent expression. "Good morning, Mom. Where is Dad? Where is..." That question sounded so ordinary, so routine, that for a brief, disorienting moment I considered lying, saying that Philip had gone out early and would be back soon. I delayed the inevitable pain for a few hours, but looking into my son's honey-colored eyes, the same eyes as Philip's, I realized I couldn't do it. "Son," I began. My voice trembled despite my efforts to keep it steady. "Something terrible has happened. Your father went to Nuevo Laredo yesterday to handle a matter with a client. And there, the words failed me. How could I tell him that the man he admired most in the world, his hero, his safe place, had been brutally stabbed to death in a bar at the border? How could I put something so brutal, so senseless, into words? "He's dead, isn't he?" Charlie asked, his voice unusually calm. The man with the hat warned me this would happen. A chill ran down my spine. The man with the hat, Charlie's most persistent hallucination, which we thought was under control thanks to medication. Had he come back, or was this just a grim coincidence? "Yes, son," I confirmed, taking his hands on the table. "There was a fight in a bar. He tried to protect a girl who was being harassed, and a man attacked him with a knife. He didn't make it." I expected tears, screams, denial, any typical grief reaction. Instead, I saw something even more terrifying, a distance, a disconnection, as if a veil had fallen over Charlie's eyes, separating him from reality. "He warned me," my son repeated, his gaze fixed on a point beyond my shoulder. "The man with the hat said Dad was going to leave us, that it would just be the two of us, and that it'd be for the best." "Charlie," I called, squeezing his hands, trying to pull him back. "That's not true. Your father didn't leave us by choice. It was a terrible accident, a tragedy. No one could have seen it coming." But he wasn't listening anymore. He suddenly stood, walked to the window, and began to murmur, whether to himself or to someone only he could see. The crisis we had feared was unfolding. Overwhelmed by the impact of the loss, I immediately called Dr. Vasconcelos, explaining the situation in rushed, broken words full of fear. He understood the gravity of the moment and promised to come to our apartment as soon as possible. Meanwhile, he instructed me to give an additional dose of the emergency medication. "Keep him calm, don't confront him, don't dismiss what he is seeing or hearing, just stay by his side." The next hours passed in a blur of phone calls, tough decisions, and logistical arrangements. Philip's body had to be transported from Nuevo Laredo to Monterrey. The funeral needed to be arranged, family members notified, and above all, Charlie had to be stabilized. Dr. Vasconcelos arrived around 10 a.m., accompanied by a psychiatric nurse. They found Charlie in the middle of a psychotic episode, animatedly talking with his father, who, in his mind, was sitting on the living room sofa, explaining that death was just an act to deceive them, the invisible pursuers that filled his delusions. "He's in complete dissociation," the doctor said after examining my son. "His mind is protecting him from unbearable pain by creating an alternate reality where his father is still alive." "What should we do?" I asked, exhausted and broken, fearing the answer I already knew. He must be admitted immediately. It's not safe to leave him at home in this state. He could hurt himself or others. So on the very same day I lost my husband, it became necessary to admit my son once again, this time not to San Carlos Hospital, but to a more modern private clinic with advanced treatment funded by the life insurance that Philip, always the planner, had taken out years before. The following days were the darkest of my life. Philip's funeral felt like a state of near numbness, as if I were watching everything from a distance outside of myself. People I barely knew shook my hand, offering their condolences, whispering words of comfort that failed to reach me. The absence of Charlie, sedated in a psychiatric clinic, unaware of his father's farewell, added even more pain, as if I was losing my family layer by layer, one loss after another. The burial took place in Monterey, not in Nuevo Laredo. I couldn't bear to leave Philip in the city that had taken him from me. Our life was now in the capital of Nuevo León. As hard as it was to admit, there were no plans to return to the border. George, Philip's partner, was outstanding during that time. He handled all the paperwork, legal matters, and everything related to the business. He made sure I had immediate access to Philip's share in the border accounts and that the insurance was activated smoothly, preventing any financial burden from adding to the heavy weight of grief I was already carrying. A week after the funeral, when the house finally emptied of well-meaning relatives and concerned friends, I sat alone on the terrace of our apartment, watching the sunset over Monterey. It was a breathtaking sunset. The sky, painted in shades of orange and pink, was something Philip would have loved to photograph. The beauty of the moment brutally contrasted with the emptiness I felt inside. It was on that terrace where I finally let the reality of my situation fully sink in. I was alone. My husband, my life partner, had been brutally murdered, and my only child was hospitalized, struggling with a severe psychotic episode, a condition that the trauma might have permanently worsened. Our carefully rebuilt life in Monterey had fallen apart in just a few hours. I cried until my tears ran dry, until my body ached from the effort of sobbing. I cried for Philip, for the life we had built together, for the dreams we would never fulfill. I cried for Charlie, for the uncertain future that awaited him, for the constant battle against the demons in his mind. I cried for myself, for the woman I once was and would never be again. When the sun finally slipped below the horizon, I stood up, wiped my face, and made a decision. I wouldn't let myself fall apart. No, not then. Not when my son needed me more than ever. Philip was gone, but Charlie was still here fighting, and I would fight alongside him until my last breath. The following months were a tough road of readjustment. Charlie remained hospitalized for 6 weeks, receiving intensive treatment with new medications, daily therapies, and innovative methods to manage his delusions, which now included frequent conversations with his deceased father. I visited him every day, spending hours by his side, even when he barely seemed to notice my presence, lost in his own world. I read books he loved as a child, newspaper articles, and letters from old school friends. I talked about Philip, sharing memories we had together, gradually trying to help him come to terms with the reality of the loss. Meanwhile, I faced practical challenges I never imagined I would have to handle alone. What should I do about the accounting for the border business? I had no training in that area. I couldn't take on Philip's role operationally. George offered to buy my share, assuring me of a fair price and monthly payments that would provide financial stability for the next few years. Then there was the house in Nuevo Laredo. Keeping it meant holding on to a painful connection to the place where Philip was murdered. Selling it meant cutting the last physical tie to the city where we built our family and shared so many happy memories. Decisions, all resting on my shoulders alone, without Philip to talk things over with, to reflect or give advice, and without even Charlie in a clear enough mental state to share his opinion. During this time, I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. I learned to trust my own judgment, make difficult decisions, and accept their consequences. I sold the house at the border. I accepted George's offer for Philip's share in the office. I reorganized our finances to ensure that no matter what happened, Charlie would always have the resources for his treatment. In January 1996, 2 months after Philip's death, Charlie was finally discharged from the clinic. He was more stable. His delusions were under control thanks to the new medication, and he was gradually accepting the fact of his father's death, at least on a conscious level. But returning home, he was a different young man. Quieter, more reserved, with a distant look that rarely brightened. The doctors explained that this was normal, a result of the combined effects of stronger medication, the natural process of grief, and the progression of schizophrenia itself. Dr. Vasconcelos warned me during one of our consultations that things might never go back to the way they were before. Right now, what mattered most was stability, security, and routine. That's what I tried to provide. I transformed our apartment into a haven of calm and predictability. I established regular schedules for meals, medication, and therapy, creating a peaceful environment without overwhelming stimuli that could trigger crises. I was always present and attentive, but never overbearing. Charlie had turned 18, legally an adult, but emotionally more vulnerable than a child. The dream of college was on hold for the moment. Instead, he began attending a psychosocial rehabilitation center 3 times a week, where he took part in therapeutic workshops, support groups, and recreational activities, alongside other young people facing similar challenges. This routine worked for a while. There were even moments of hope. Sparks of the old Charlie appeared from time to time, an insightful comment about a book he was reading, an unexpected joke at dinner, a renewed interest in drawing, a pastime he had always loved as a child. But the stability was fragile, built on shaky foundations. A simple trigger, like a photo of Philip appearing unexpectedly, a song on the radio that reminded him of his father, or the casual mention of Nuevo Laredo during a conversation, would cause his anxiety to spike, his gaze to become distant again, and his lips to move in silent conversations with invisible listeners. At first, these relapses were brief, manageable with emergency medication, with the breathing techniques he had learned in therapy, and my calming presence by his side. But over time, they grew more frequent, more intense, and harder to control. In March, a particularly frightening incident occurred. I woke up in the middle of the night to Charlie standing by my bed, a pocket knife in his hand, his glassy eyes fixed on me. He said he needed to check, murmuring in a distant, almost mechanical voice, to check if I was real or an imposter. I managed to calm him down, get him to hand over the pocket knife, take him back to his room, and give him the emergency medication. But something broke inside me that night. The harsh reality of our situation became impossible to ignore. My son, in his moments of crisis, posed a real danger to himself and potentially to me. The next morning, I called Dr. Vasconcelos. The conversation stretched on, filled with pain and tears on my part, accompanied by thoughtful silences from him. In the end, the decision was inevitable. Charlie needed a level of care and supervision that I could no longer provide. There are alternatives, the doctor said gently but firmly. We are not talking about some old asylum, Mrs. Selena. Nowadays, there are modern and humane therapeutic residences where he would receive 24-hour care, participate in structured activities, and interact with other patients while you could visit him regularly. Like a nursing home, I replied bitterly, guilt overwhelming my heart. I'm abandoning my son. Not at all, he insisted. You're doing what's best for him, making sure he gets the care he needs. It's an act of love, not abandonment. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But in the weeks that followed, as I toured facilities, talked with professionals, and filled out paperwork, the feeling of betraying Charlie and failing as a mother haunted me. How do you explain to an 18-year-old, already grappling with the loss of his father, that he can't live with his mother anymore? How do you make him understand it's not rejection or abandonment, but the only way to keep him safe and cared for. The conversation I dreaded finally happened in April on a sunny afternoon. Charlie was in a good place, clear-headed and present, even helping prepare the meal. I sat beside him on the terrace, holding his hands in mine, and tried to explain as lovingly as I could what was about to happen. To my surprise, there was no resistance, no accusations, just a slight nod of understanding, a resigned sigh, and then a question that broke my heart. "It's about that night with the pocket knife, isn't it? You're afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of you, son," I replied, feeling tears blur my vision. "I'm afraid for your safety. When voices get loud, you could seriously hurt yourself. You wouldn't forgive me if something happened to you while I'm in charge." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "The man in the hat says it's better this way, that I should stay away from you, that I'm a threat." That statement hit me like a stab. The illness was not only stealing my son's mind, but also his right to be unconditionally loved, to feel worthy of care, closeness, and a normal life. "The man in the hat is wrong," I said firmly, holding his face in my hands to make him look into my eyes. "You're not a danger. You are my son, my heart outside my chest. That will never change, and I'm not sending you away. I will be with you every day, visiting you and involved in your treatment. We'll just sleep in different rooms." I'm not sure if he fully understood. How could he? But he accepted it with a resignation that seemed to suggest he grasped, on some level, the need for this change. In May 1996, 6 months after Philip's death, Charlie moved to the Nuevo Horizonte Therapeutic Residence, a relatively new facility on the outskirts of Monterrey. It was a nice place, at least on the outside, a large, airy house with well-maintained gardens, private rooms for the residents, cozy common areas, and a team of professionals who seemed genuinely committed to the patient's well-being. On moving day, I helped arrange his room, putting up photos of us on the walls, organizing his favorite books on the small shelf, and making the bed with sheets from home so he would have something familiar in this new environment. When it was time to say goodbye, he hugged me tightly. "Everything is going to be all right, Mom," he whispered, strangely reversing our roles as if he was the one trying to comfort me. I understand why it has to be this way. Driving back to the empty apartment that night, I let the tears flow freely. In less than a year, I had lost my husband to violence, and in a way, I had also lost my son to the cruel illness that consumed his mind. The house that was supposed to be the refuge for our family had become a quiet place where only I remained, surrounded by photographs and memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, from a distant time. In the months that followed, I established a new routine. I visited Charlie every day. I attended the family meetings organized by the institution. I spoke regularly with his doctors and therapists. On good days, I took him on little outings, like walks in the nearby park, enjoying coffee at a bakery, or occasionally having lunch at the apartment on weekends. He seemed to be adjusting reasonably well. The right medication, regular routine, and consistent professional follow-up contributed to a stability that we couldn't achieve at home. There were episodes, of course, days when I found him more confused, more distant, talking to his deceased father or sometimes to the persistent man in the hat. But those moments were quickly handled by the team, preventing serious crises like the ones I had seen at home. The doctor said he was making progress, slowly but surely, and I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. To fill the empty days and the overwhelming silence of the apartment, I decided to go back to work, not with the sweets that used to bring me joy in Nuevo Laredo. I had lost the pleasure of creating sweet treats when life had turned so bitter. Instead, I took a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic near home. The work was simple, but it kept me busy, gave me some human interaction, and most importantly, it was just a 15-minute walk from the therapeutic residence, allowing me to visit Charlie during my break or right after my shift. I felt like a plant whose roots had been torn out, desperately trying to strike new shoots in barren soil. Every little routine, every new acquaintance, and every habit I formed was an effort to build some kind of structure, some meaning in a world that had lost its fundamental bearings. The first anniversary of Philip's death hit like a storm breaking through a sky that had started to clear. November 1996. A year since I lost my life partner, my safe haven. The pain, which had become a constant yet manageable background hum in my mind, returned with full force that day. I spent the morning at the cemetery, sitting by the simple yet elegant tombstone, quietly speaking to the man who still visited my dreams every night. I told him about Charlie, about the therapeutic residence, about my new job, about the overwhelming sense of loneliness I felt even when surrounded by people, about the constant fear about the future. "How am I going to move on without you, Philip?" I whispered, tracing the engraved letters on the headstone. "How will I take care of our son on my own?" I wasn't expecting an answer, of course, but in that sacred silence of the cemetery, beneath the melancholic gray of November, I felt something settle inside me. It wasn't resignation or total acceptance. I would never fully accept what happened, the senseless cruelty that took Philip from us. But perhaps it was an acknowledgement that despite everything, I was surviving. Day by day, breath by breath, I was still here. And as long as I was present, Charlie would have someone fighting for him, believing in him, loving him unconditionally. I visited him that afternoon as I did every day. To my surprise, he seemed especially clear-headed, as if he too felt the weight of the date. "A year ago today, isn't it?" "Oh," he asked as we sat in the residence's garden. "Which dad went away?" I nodded, my voice failing me at that moment. "I miss him," Charlie continued, his eyes fixed on the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. "Not the dad who shows up sometimes during my episodes, but the real dad, the one who played ball with me in the yard, who taught me math, who never gave up on me, even when I started to get sick." The tears I had held back at the cemetery finally slipped silently down my cheeks. It was the first time in months that Charlie had spoken so clearly about Philip, distinguishing between his real father and the figure that appeared in his delusions. I finally managed to say, "I think he would be proud of you for how you're facing all this, for how hard you're working on your treatment." A sad smile flickered on my son's lips. Maybe he would be saddened to see what I've become, a mentally ill person, institutionalized, with no future. "Don't say that," I interrupted, taking his hands. "You have a future, Charlie, even if it's different from what we once imagined, but a future nonetheless. And you'll always have me." He squeezed my hands back, a simple gesture, but so meaningful in that moment. For a brief and precious instant, we were just mother and son sharing pain, supporting one another. Not a woman visiting a patient in a psychiatric center. Not a young man struggling to tell reality from hallucination. Just us, family. What remained of the family we once were. Months turned into years. 1997 gave way to 1998, then 1999. Charlie stayed in the therapeutic residence, coping with the ups and downs of his treatment. There were periods of noticeable stability when he actively took part in workshops, formed bonds with other residents, and even showed an interest in returning to some classes. Yet we also faced crises, some so severe they required temporary hospitalizations in more specialized clinics. I continued with my routine, working at the medical clinic, which gradually transitioned into a more stable administrative position alongside my daily visits to Charlie and maintaining a small apartment that never really felt like home. My existence was steady yet empty, marked more by those who were absent than by those who were present. As the new millennium arrived, advances in schizophrenia treatment emerged, more effective medications with fewer side effects, innovative therapeutic approaches, and a deeper understanding of the illness and its mechanisms, allowing for more humane and effective care. Charlie, at 22 years old, benefited from these advancements. Gradually, Thanks to the new medication, his seizures became less frequent and less intense. The man in the hat, who had tormented him for years, began to appear less often, turning into a distant shadow rather than a threatening voice. In 2001, something unexpected happened. The therapeutic residents launched a partial reintegration program. More stable patients were allowed to leave the institution for a few days a week in controlled family settings as part of the process of reintegrating into community life. Charlie was among the first chosen. "He's ready," said his psychiatrist, Dr. Lucy, who had been overseeing his case for years. He still needed supervision. There would be difficult days, and he required a structured environment, but he could benefit from more time at home, greater independence, and a stronger connection to the outside world. I can't describe the mix of emotions that overwhelmed me. Joy and hope, but also paralyzing fear. What if he suffered a severe crisis under my care? What if the triggers at home turned out to be too intense? What if I couldn't protect him just like I failed to do that awful night years ago with the knife? Yet, above all, there was the deep longing to have my son back, even if only partially, even under controlled conditions, to prepare his breakfast, to share TV nights, to create new memories beyond the walls of the institution. So, starting in September 2001, Charlie began spending weekends at home. From Friday night to Sunday afternoon, a nurse from the residence would bring him on Friday and pick him up on Sunday, ensuring that the transition was smooth, medication was given properly, and any signs of deterioration were caught in time. Those weekends were very valuable despite the challenges. Charlie still experienced episodes of disconnection, occasionally talking to invisible people and requiring strict routines and calm environments. However, there were also moments of surprising normality, like when we cooked together, discussed a book we had both read, or simply sat on the terrace watching the city and sharing a comforting silence. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom," she said one of those nights, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it hasn't been easy. I would never give up on you," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat from the emotions held back. The treatment didn't work well enough to be expanded in 2003. From then on, Charlie spent 4 days at home, returning to the facility only Monday through Wednesday for intensive therapy and medication adjustments when needed. It was almost like reclaiming what we had lost, rebuilding a version of family life I thought was gone forever. Of course, it wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, days when he would lock himself in his room, refusing to eat or talk, moments when his gaze would become vacant again and his voice mechanical. Our activities, places we could go, and people we could relate to were all heavily limited. Schizophrenia still cast a large shadow, constantly imposing rules and barriers in our lives. Yet we were together, fighting day by day, year after year. And despite the ongoing struggles, we found small joys and tiny victories. In 2005, 10 years after Charlie's initial diagnosis and 7 years after Philip's murder, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't dared during all that time: hope. Not naive hope, like believing in a miraculous cure or a return to the life before the illness, but a mature, realistic hope for a life with dignity and purpose, filled with moments of genuine happiness despite the condition's limitations. Charlie, now 27, had discovered an interest that soon became almost a calling: art. He found in painting a form of expression that seemed to bypass the confines of his fragmented mind. Her abstract works, vibrant in color and often unsettling yet always captivating, began to attract the attention not only of the therapists at the residence but also of visitors and other professionals. A small exhibition was arranged at the city's cultural center titled Extraordinary Minds. It showcased the works of psychiatric patients from various institutions in Monterey. Charlie's paintings filled an entire wall, standing out because of his surprisingly refined technique, his unique color palette, and the almost tangible energy they radiated. I was present at the opening, watching from a corner as my son, dressed in a smart shirt he had specially bought for the occasion, spoke with the attendees, shared his creative process, and accepted compliments with a mix of modesty and pride. At times, it was hard to tell him apart from any other promising young artist. There were no visible signs of the illness that affected him internally, no hint of the daily struggles he endured just to stay connected to reality. That night, while taking a taxi home, Charlie returned to the residence accompanied by the therapists who had attended the event. At that moment, I allowed myself to cry. These were not tears of sadness or despair like so many I had shed over the years, but tears of such immense pride that my heart ached. My son, against all odds, had found his voice, a way to connect with the world, to transform the chaos in his mind into something tangible, something beautiful, something that resonated with others. The illness had not completely defeated him. There were places within him where he could still flourish, where he could truly be himself. After so long seeing myself merely as a caregiver, a support, a safety net, I now let myself embrace a new role, that of a proud mother celebrating her son's achievements. No matter how different they were from the dreams I once held for him, life would remain challenging. There would be more crises, more hospitalizations, more moments of anguish. Schizophrenia is not a condition that simply disappears, even with the best available treatment. And the absence of Philip, that pain, which became a part of me like a scar that never fully fades, would still be felt on every birthday, every Christmas, and every important moment where he wasn't there to share it. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for more than mere survival. Maybe there was a chance to find small joys, to discover a purpose, to seek meaning even amidst the ruins of what used to be our life. And it was with that thought, not exactly filled with hope, but at least not completely bleak, that I carried on, day by day, year by year, alongside my son, facing together the challenges that cruel fate had imposed on us, searching for beauty wherever we could, making sense out of chaos, refusing to let tragedy define our story. In October 2008, my life took an unexpected turn. Charlie, at 30 years old, had reached a stability that allowed us to maintain an almost normal routine. He spent 5 days a week at home, only returning to the therapeutic residence for consultations and activities. His medication was well regulated, crises had noticeably decreased, and in fact he would occasionally sell some paintings through a gallery specializing in art by psychiatric patients. I was 55 years old and still working at the same medical clinic, now holding the position of administrative manager. A simple life without great excitement, but stable. After so many years of storms, it seemed we had finally found a safe harbor. That Monday morning, I was getting ready to leave for work when I slipped on the bathroom rug. It was a silly fall that, under normal circumstances, would have only resulted in a bruise and a story to tell, but I immediately felt something was wrong. A sharp pain in my right ankle, almost instant swelling. "Mom, are you okay in there?" Charlie knocked on the door, his voice full of concern. I heard the movement. "I slipped, son," I replied, trying to sound calmer than I actually felt. "I think I hurt my ankle." He helped me out of the bathroom, supporting me all the way to the bed. He examined my foot with surprising care, his gentle fingers probing around the swelling that was already noticeable. "We need to go to the hospital," he declared, surprising me with his clarity and sense of initiative. "It might be broken." And indeed it was. A fracture in the lateral malleolus, the doctor explained after reviewing the x-ray. It wouldn't require surgery, but I would need 6 weeks of immobilization in a cast, followed by physical therapy and complete rest in the first few days. "Does she live alone?" the doctor asked, a young man with deep dark circles under his eyes who worked in shifts. I didn't answer, shifting my gaze toward Charlie, who sat quietly in the chair. "I live with my son." The doctor cast a quick look at Charlie, probably noticing something in his behavior. The rhythmic swinging of his legs, his gaze occasionally drifting to a blank spot in the room, his lips moving as if in silent conversation. Doctors always pay attention to those details. Is there someone else who can assist you during these initial days? He pressed, his tone conveying doubt about Charlie's ability to care for me. I have friends, I replied. In truth, I didn't. Years of caring for a son with schizophrenia had shrunk my social circle to almost nothing, and I can hire someone if necessary. The doctor nodded, though he didn't seem fully convinced. I strongly recommend having help during the first few days. At least you won't be able to put weight on your foot. You'll need assistance with basic tasks like bathing or preparing meals. We left the hospital with my foot in a cast, a prescription for painkillers, and a brochure with instructions on cast care. Charlie firmly held my arm as I balanced on the ill-fitting crutches, guiding me toward the taxi that would take us home. "I'm going to take care of you, Mom," he said as the car wound through the streets of Monterey. It wasn't just the promise of a mature son to his aging mother. It was a determined child trying to prove he could bear a responsibility too heavy for his age. "Thank you, son," I replied, feeling my throat tighten in a swirl of gratitude and worry. How far could he really go? How long would his circumstances allow him to take on the role of caregiver? After so many years of him being the one in need of care, the first few days passed surprisingly well. Charlie was attentive, committed, and almost meticulous in following the medical instructions. He helped me to the bathroom, prepared simple meals, and diligently kept track of my medication schedule. I called my workplace to explain the situation and managed to get a 3-week medical leave. Dr. Lucy, Charlie's psychiatrist, decided to make a home visit after hearing about the accident, an exceptional gesture that reflected the special bond she had developed with us over the years. "How are you managing?" she asked after examining my ankle and approving the care we were providing. "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "Charlie has been amazing. I barely recognized my son these past few days." She smiled, but her eyes revealed a professional concern I noticed right away. "That's great, but we need to stay vigilant," she whispered while Charlie was in the kitchen making tea for us. This sudden role reversal from patient to caregiver could be overwhelming for him, even if he wasn't showing it now. And stress is one of the main factors that trigger relapses in schizophrenia. "What do you suggest?" I asked, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest that comes with any talk of potential crises. "I'm going to increase our sessions to twice a week right here at home to make it easier. And I strongly recommend you consider the possibility of outside help. A nurse for a few hours a day, not just to assist you, but to lighten Charlie's load." I promised to think it over, even though I knew our resources were limited. Their health insurance would cover part of the physical therapy, but hiring a private nurse would be a costly luxury to maintain. In the second week, with my foot in a cast, the first changes in Charlie's behavior began to show, subtle at first. A lapse here, a burst of irritability there. Nothing alarming, just signs of fatigue, I thought. Anyone would feel exhausted caring for someone 24/7. It was on Thursday of that week that I noticed something more worrying. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling thirsty and called for Charlie to help me get water, but there was no response. I moved toward the door of the room, leaning on my crutches, and I saw him sitting in the dark living room, animatedly talking to someone who wasn't there. "But you don't understand," he said, gesturing toward the empty sofa. "She relies on me now. I can't. He stopped abruptly as he sensed my presence. He turned sharply, eyes wide, reflecting the dim light coming in from the street. "Mom," he said in an oddly normal voice, as if he hadn't been mid-conversation with thin air. "Do you need something?" "Just a little water," I replied, trying to act like I hadn't seen or heard anything. Years of living with the illness had taught me when to confront and when to pretend everything was normal. "Sorry for waking you." He quickly got up and went to the kitchen to get some water. I watched his movements, searching for other signs of instability. His hands were shaking, his steps unsteady, and his posture too tense. He looked fine, but I knew appearances could be deceiving when it came to schizophrenia. The calm exterior often hides an internal storm. In the days that followed, the episodes became more frequent and harder to ignore. Charlie spent long stretches talking to himself in the bathroom with the faucet running to mask the sound. He would forget simple tasks like giving me my medications or preparing food. One night I found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m, with all the cabinets open and dishes scattered across the floor. "I'm looking for the cameras," he explained when I asked what he was doing. "They are watching us, Mom. They want to know if I'm taking good care of you." I called the doctor. The next day, Lucy arrived. She adjusted Charlie's medication, increased the frequency of his sessions even more, and stressed the need for outside help. "It's no longer just a suggestion, Selena," she said with the gentle firmness that always characterized her. "It's a medical necessity. Charlie is becoming unstable under the pressure. We need to relieve that before he suffers a total crisis." I finally gave in. I used part of the savings I had set aside for emergencies. Ironically, that fund I always thought would be used for some crisis with Charlie ended up being used to pay someone to take care of me. I hired a nursing technician to come in for 4 hours a day. Sylvia was a strong middle-aged woman with calloused hands and a warm smile. She had experience with psychiatric patients, which made her even more valuable in our situation. She didn't just take care of me, bathing, bandaging, doing small exercises to prevent muscle atrophy, but she also knew how to handle Charlie on his difficult days. "Is everything okay, buddy?" Then she'd ask when she found him talking to his hallucinations, "Do you want to share what's bothering you today?" And surprisingly, many times he did talk, as if Sylvia's presence, someone outside the emotional weight of being his mother, created a safe space for him to express his fears and confusion. "The man in the hat is back," he admitted one afternoon while Sylvia was changing my bandage. "He says I'm not taking good care of my mother, that she'll die because of me." When my father passed away, my heart clenched hearing that. After all these years, Charlie still carried the guilt of Philip's death. He kept thinking, somewhere deep inside, that he could have prevented the tragedy. Sylvia, without missing a beat, casually asked, "And do you believe him?" as if she were talking about the weather. Charlie hesitated at first, but finally admitted, "When I'm really tired." To which Sylvia replied, while finishing my bandage, "I think the man in the hat doesn't know what he's talking about," giving me a gentle pat on the leg. "I've never seen a son take care of his mother like you do, and I have experience in many homes." I noticed a change in Charlie's expression. He relaxed. The tension he'd built up over the past few days started to fade. They were just a few simple words, free of judgment, from someone he didn't have to emotionally protect. In that moment, I realized that our mother-son dynamic, as loving as it was, also added to the problem. Charlie felt responsible not only for my physical well-being, but also for my emotional state. By hiding his own struggles, voices, and fears to avoid upsetting me, he only made his internal burden heavier. The presence of Sylvia became a release valve, a third party in our closed system that allowed those accumulated tensions to be let go. In the weeks that followed, with her help for 4 hours a day and frequent visits from Dr. Lucy, we managed to find a fragile but functional balance. My ankle gradually improved. After 6 weeks, they were able to remove the cast, revealing pale, dry skin and a noticeably thinner limb from disuse. I began physical therapy 3 times a week, using adapted transportation for people with reduced mobility provided by social services from the town hall. With each milestone, the first time I took a step without crutches, the first time I managed to bathe on my own, the day I returned to work, initially for half a shift, Charlie also seemed to be improving little by little, as if my physical recovery was somehow linked to his emotional stability. We continued with the support of Sylvia, even as my physical recovery was well underway, dedicating 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, enough time to give Charlie a breather, a break from the constant responsibility he felt toward me. It was during one of those afternoons, almost 4 months after my fall, that something extraordinary happened. I returned home earlier than expected from therapy. The therapist had an emergency and canceled the session halfway through. I opened the door carefully, not wanting to interrupt if Charlie was engaged in one of his painting sessions that required total concentration. The room was empty, but I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I approached slowly, leaning slightly on the cane that had now replaced the crutches, and then I heard her say that my painting was visceral and cathartic. Charlie was speaking with an energy I rarely heard from him. I wasn't sure he fully understood what that meant, but from the way he said it, it was clearly a compliment. Of course, it was a compliment. Sylvia's voice replied, followed by the sound of kitchen utensils. "That blue painting you showed me gives me chills. You can feel the emotion leaping off the canvas." I stayed at the door, watching the scene unnoticed. Charlie and Sylvia were together at the kitchen counter, preparing some dough. Flour partially covered his face, and Sylvia had a kitchen towel draped over her shoulder. They looked like two friends cooking together, laughing and chatting about art and life. "Do you think I could ever have a solo exhibition?" Charlie suddenly asked, his voice shy and vulnerable. It wasn't just about those small art shows, but about a proper one in a conventional gallery. "And why couldn't you?" Sylvia replied, nudging him gently. "You have more than enough talent. And look, my nephew works at a small gallery over in the Bishop's neighborhood. I can talk to him and see if he can come take a look at your paintings." Charlie's face lit up with a hope so pure, so genuine, that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I stepped back silently, deciding to come in a little noisier to announce my arrival. That moment was too precious to interrupt. That simple human connection that my son rarely managed to establish with people outside of the therapeutic medical environment. In the months that followed, Sylvia became more than just a caregiver. She transformed into a friend, almost like family. Her nephew, Leonard, actually came to see Charlie's work and was impressed enough to organize a small exhibition at the gallery where he worked. He categorized the pieces as contemporary art from the North, with no mention of Charlie's condition, just art judged on its own merits. The opening took place in July 2009 on a cool, elegant winter night in the mountains, a small, intimate event with affordable wine and simple appetizers. But to us, it felt like the most spectacular gala night in history. Charlie, nervous but determined, wore the blue shirt that had belonged to Philip, carefully kept all those years. I chose a new dress, the first I had bought in years, and even treated myself to a visit to the hairdresser. As I walked into the gallery and saw Charlie's paintings displayed on the white walls, illuminated by spotlights labeled with his full name and titles he had chosen himself, something in our relationship changed forever. We were no longer just the overprotective mother and the sick son. We were Selena and Carlos Philip, a proud woman and an artist in the making. That night, 3 paintings were sold, one of them to an art teacher from the University of Monterrey, who had no idea that the creator he admired so much was living with schizophrenia. "Your work has an almost dreamlike quality," he told the young artist, who listened intently, his hands slightly trembling from a mix of nerves and excitement. "There's a depersonalization that reminds me of Magritte, but with a much more vibrant palette, almost feverish and captivating." I watched my son stand a little taller at that compliment. His chest swelled not with fantasies of grandeur, but with the genuine validation of his talent. On the way back home, Charlie stayed silent for several minutes, absorbed in the view from the taxi window, urban lights reflecting on his thoughtful face. "You know, Mom," he finally said in a soft yet determined voice, "I think Dad would have enjoyed tonight." I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat before replying, "I'm absolutely sure he would have, son, definitely." That was a turning point in our lives. The accident, which at first seemed like a tragedy, with me immobilized and my son taking on a role he didn't feel ready for, became the driving force behind transformations we would never have chosen to start. My son found not only an outlet through art, but also a sense of purpose and an identity that went beyond his illness. I, for my part, discovered the value of loosening my grip a little and trusting that sometimes the world could be kind to him, that there were people like Sylvia and Leonard who could look beyond clinical labels. Schizophrenia wasn't cured. There were certainly tough days, occasional crises, and medication adjustments. The man in the hat still appeared during the hardest moments, but now we shared the burden not only between ourselves, but also with a small support network that had naturally grown. Sylvia, Leonard, other artists from the gallery, and a creative therapy group that Charlie had started attending. Today, sitting in this rocking chair, watching the walls of my living room decorated with my son's artwork, some pieces he insisted I keep and others I collected from his exhibitions, I feel as proud as any mother could. I reflect on how life takes unexpected turns. The fall in the bathroom, which at the time seemed minor, added to the many tragedies we had already endured and turned out to be a blessing in disguise, a detour that led us down paths we would never have discovered otherwise. Charlie is now 47. He still lives with schizophrenia, faces some limitations and needs supervision and support, but he has also become a recognized artist within specialized circles. He occasionally gives talks on art and mental health. He enjoys a small circle of friends and leads a life that, during those dark days of the initial diagnosis, hospitalizations, and violent crises, I never would have believed possible. At 72, I'm here sharing this story with you, perhaps to bring hope to other parents facing a loved one's diagnosis. Maybe to show that the stories of families affected by severe mental illness don't always end in tragedy. Or perhaps simply because, after holding this story inside for so many years, I feel it's time to let it out and turn it into something that might help others. If you've stayed with me this far, dear friend, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know it hasn't been easy to hear this story, but I hope you found something valuable in it, something that connects with your own journey, whatever that may be. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If this story has touched your heart in any way, please give it a like. Subscribe to the Grandmother's Memories channel so you don't miss our upcoming life stories. And let me know in the comments which part of Latin America you're watching from. This grandmother sends you a big loving hug. Remember, no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again.